March 17th, 1936. 11:47 p.m., a back room above a Lenox Avenue social club. 3 people know about tonight's meeting. By midnight, 5 people know. By 12:15, the wrong person knows. And by 1 a.m., someone's life will never be the same. This is the story they still tell in Harlem. Not the version in the newspapers, not the sanitized version, the version whispered in barbershops and late-night diners. The legend of how one man read a room in 60 seconds and changed everything. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand who controlled Harlem's money in 1936. The numbers game, policy, the poor man's lottery. Every day, thousands of Harlem residents placed bets, nickels, dimes, quarters, on 3-digit combinations. The winning number came from somewhere legitimate. The last 3 digits of the daily treasury balance, or racetrack betting totals. Clean, random, impossible to fix. But someone had to collect those bets. Someone had to pay the winners. Someone had to manage the collectors, the runners, the spot operators. Someone had to make sure the math worked and the cash flowed. In 1936, that someone was Stephanie St. Clair. They called her the Queen of Policy, Madame St. Clair, a self-made businesswoman who'd built an empire from nothing. No favors, no partners, no compromises. She ran her operation with ledgers, discipline, and an ironclad reputation. You could trust your bet with St. Clair's people. You could trust your payout. In a neighborhood where trust was currency, that meant everything. But empires attract wolves. After Dutch Schultz's death in late 1935, the power vacuum had created opportunities. New players wanted in, old players wanted more, and everyone wanted what St. Clair had built, a smooth, profitable operation with community trust baked in. She'd been fighting encroachment for months. Pressure from downtown operators, whispers about partnerships that sounded more like takeovers, threats wrapped in business language. So when an opportunity came to stabilize things, a deal with terms she could live with, protections she could enforce, she took the meeting. 3 people in the room. St. Clair, her most trusted lieutenant, a man named Marcus Webb, who'd been with her since the beginning, and a representative from the new coalition downtown, someone who could speak for multiple interests, make binding promises, put things in writing. The kind of meeting you don't advertise. The kind of meeting where secrecy isn't just professional, it's survival. And yet, somehow by midnight, people who should never have known were making phone calls. Here's what the history books miss. In Harlem's underworld, information moved faster than money. A whisper in the wrong ear could unravel months of planning. A leak could turn a protective deal into a liability, a negotiation into a weakness. St. Clair knew this. Webb knew this. Everyone at that table knew this, which is why what happened next became legend. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The newspapers from that spring tell you almost nothing. You'll find small items buried in the back pages. Police raid social club. Numbers operation disrupted. Vague references to ongoing investigations into illegal gambling. What you won't find is context. You won't find the real story. Here's what the papers couldn't print. By early 1936, the numbers game in Harlem generated more daily cash flow than most legitimate businesses in Manhattan. Conservative estimates suggested $20,000 to $30,000 per day across all operations. St. Clair's organization alone handled a significant portion. That kind of money creates pressure, not just from law enforcement, though raids happened, but from competitors, from corrupt officials wanting payoffs, from opportunists seeing an opening. The pressure had been building for months. Small moves. A collector getting hassled. A spot getting raided the day after a big payout. Coincidences that weren't coincidences. St. Clair had faced down Dutch Schultz himself when he'd tried to muscle into Harlem's numbers. She'd fought publicly, taken out newspaper ads declaring her independence, refused to be intimidated. But Schultz was dead now, and the new players were smarter. They didn't send muscle first. They sent lawyers, accountants, people who talked about consolidation and efficiency and mutual benefit. The meeting on March 17th was supposed to be the endgame, a framework both sides could accept. Terms that let St. Clair keep operational control while giving the downtown coalition what they needed. Predictability, a cut that satisfied multiple interests, and, most importantly, no more chaos. Everyone benefited if this worked, everyone lost if it fell apart, which is exactly why the leak was so dangerous, and that's where the story turns. Let's talk about what was actually on the table that night. Not in specific numbers, those details stayed in that room, but in principle. St. Clair's operation was valuable because it worked. Her collectors were reliable, her math was clean, her payouts were prompt. In a cash business built on trust, she had something no amount of muscle could buy: reputation. The downtown coalition knew this. They didn't want to destroy what she'd built. They wanted to own a piece of it. Or more accurately, they wanted to ensure their interests were protected as the landscape changed. The deal being discussed involved territory, percentages, and protection. Who could operate where? Who got what split? Who would handle interference from law enforcement? Who would mediate disputes? Boring, technical stuff. The kind of details that make or break actual agreements. But here's what made it sensitive. The specific terms would create winners and losers. Other operators, people not in that room, would find out they'd been boxed out, or cut in for less, or bypassed entirely. Every number on paper represented someone's future income, someone's territory, someone's pride. Information about the deal had value to rivals who might want to interfere, to authorities who might want leverage, to opportunists who might want to play both sides, which meant the leak wasn't just a breach of confidence, it was a weapon someone could use, and that's where the story turns. Let me back up and introduce the fourth person who matters in this story. A man who wasn't in that room on March 17th, but whose presence shaped everything that happened next. His name doesn't matter for this story. Let's just call him what Harlem called him. Someone you didn't underestimate. Someone who'd built a reputation not through flash or volume, but through consistency. Someone St. Clair trusted enough to bring into her inner circle during the pressure months. He wasn't her partner. He wasn't her lieutenant. He was something more specific, the person she called when strategy mattered more than muscle, when reading people mattered more than reading ledgers. He'd earned that position through a specific skill. He saw patterns, connections, the space between what people said and what they meant. He could walk into a room of 10 people and identify the weak link, the hidden ally, the person everyone underestimated. Some called it instinct. Some called it experience. Those who knew better called it what it was. Obsessive attention to detail, backed by memory and discipline. He noticed everything, forgot nothing, and understood that information was the only leverage that lasted. By March 1936, St. Clair had learned to trust his read on situations, which is why, when she scheduled the meeting for March 17th, she'd briefed him on the basic framework. Not the specific numbers. Those stayed close. But the strategic shape, the risks, the potential outcomes. His job wasn't to attend. His job was to watch the aftermath, to monitor whether the secrecy held, to detect any ripples that suggested exposure. He was, in essence, her early warning system. And at 12:22 a.m. on March 18th, the warning went off. Here's something most people don't understand about leaks. They're rarely about betrayal. They're usually about weakness. Someone in debt who needs quick cash. Someone scared who thinks cooperation buys safety. Someone ambitious who believes information is a calling card. Someone who just can't keep their mouth shut when they should. The question isn't whether people have weaknesses. Everyone has weaknesses. The question is whether someone else knows about them and whether they know how to apply pressure. In this case, accounts suggest the weakness was simple: money. Specifically, gambling debts. The kind that compound. The kind where you keep betting to dig out of the hole, and the hole just gets deeper. One of the people who knew about the March 17th meeting had a problem. Not a moral problem, an arithmetic problem. He owed money to the wrong people. Not St. Clair's people, she would have known. Someone else's operation. The kind of debt where extensions ran out and consequences started. The numbers don't matter. What matters is leverage. Someone identified the weakness. Someone made an offer. Not money directly. That's too obvious. But a clearing of accounts. A clean slate. In exchange for one small thing: timing and location of a certain meeting. Just basic information. No details about the deal itself. Just when and where. Seems harmless, right? It's not like he was selling specifics. Just confirming that a meeting happened. Something people might figure out anyway. That's how leverage works. It starts small, reasonable, justifiable. And before you know it, you're the leak. And that's where the story turns. Let me tell you about the moment everything changed. March 18th, 12:22 a.m. A diner on 135th Street. The kind of place that stayed open late for the after-hours crowd. Cabbies, musicians finishing gigs, night workers grabbing coffee before the long ride home. Our strategic observer, let's call him the watcher for simplicity, sat in a back booth. Same booth he always used. Coffee, newspaper, casual awareness of everyone in the room. This was routine. He spent hours in places like this. Not doing anything specific, just present, available. Someone people knew they could talk to if they needed to. Someone who heard things because he was always around to hear them. But tonight was different. Tonight, he was listening for something specific, any indication that the meeting had leaked. At 12:22, he got his answer. Two men entered. Not together. They came in separately, 30 seconds apart, the kind of timing that suggests coordination. Both headed to the counter. Ordered coffee. Stood there like strangers. Except they weren't strangers. The watcher knew both of them. One was a collector for a rival operation. The other was someone he'd seen around St. Clair's spots. Not inner circle, but peripheral. Someone who'd know the rhythms, the routines, the faces. They stood at the counter. Drank their coffee. Left within a minute of each other. The whole interaction took less than 5 minutes. Most people wouldn't notice. Why would you? Two guys getting late-night coffee. But the watcher noticed something specific. The peripheral guy's hands were shaking, not drunk shaking, nervous shaking. And when the collector left first, the peripheral guy waited exactly 60 seconds. The watcher counted before dropping money on the counter and following. No words exchanged, no obvious signals, just timing. And that timing told the watcher everything he needed to know. Someone had just confirmed something. The details didn't matter yet. What mattered was the connection. A known rival operator's collector and someone from St. Clair's periphery making brief contact in the middle of the night, hours after a meeting that was supposed to stay secret. The watcher left cash on his table and walked out into the Harlem night. He had a phone call to make. But here's what nobody saw coming. He didn't call St. Clair first. He made a different call to someone who could watch the peripheral guy, follow him, see where he went, who he talked to, what he did in the hours between now and sunrise. Because the watcher understood something crucial. Catching a leak is useful. Understanding the full network. Who else knew? Who was coordinating? What the actual plan was. That was valuable. You don't close a leak by plugging one hole. You trace it back to the source. You map the entire flow. And then you make a decision about what to do with that information. This is where the story gets interesting. By 1 a.m., the watcher had 3 people moving. Not muscle, not enforcers. Watchers like himself. People who knew how to be invisible. People who could follow someone for 6 blocks and never be noticed. One tailed the peripheral guy. Let's call him Raymond, though that might not have been his real name. Raymond left the diner and walked east, hands still in his pockets, head down. Not the walk of someone heading home. The walk of someone carrying weight. Another watcher positioned himself near a payphone Raymond had been known to use, just in case. The third stayed at the diner, observing who else came and went, who might be part of a larger pattern. This is how information networks actually work. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just patient, coordinated observation. People in position, reporting back, building a picture, one detail at a time. By 1:30 a.m., they had movement. Raymond made his way to a rooming house on 132nd Street. Went inside. Lights came on in a third-floor window. Stayed on for 7 minutes, then went dark. 3 minutes later, Raymond emerged. Different posture now, the nervousness smoothed out. He lit a cigarette, hands steady now, and walked west with purpose. The watcher following him kept distance, staying parallel on the opposite side of the street, using storefronts and shadow. Raymond walked 4 blocks, stopped at a payphone, made a call that lasted less than a minute, then continued walking, this time heading toward a late-night spot known for hosting a different crowd, the crowd connected to the downtown coalition. He didn't go inside, just stood outside for 2 minutes, smoking. Then someone emerged. Someone the watchers didn't recognize immediately, and they walked together for half a block before separating. Brief conversation, maybe 30 seconds, too far away to hear words. But body language was clear, Raymond reporting, the other person acknowledging. By 2:15 a.m., the watcher had enough. He made the call to St. Clair. The conversation was brief. He laid out what he'd observed. The diner contact, the rooming house stop, the pay phone call, the late-night meeting. St. Clair asked one question. Who? The watcher gave her Raymond's name. There was silence on the line. Not surprise. Calculation. Then St. Clair said something that became part of the legend. Set it up for tomorrow night, the usual place. I want everyone there. Not handle it. Not find out more. Not bring him in. I want everyone there. Because St. Clair understood something the downtown coalition didn't. In Harlem, reputation wasn't just about strength. It was about community, about witnesses, about making sure the right lesson reached the right people. Whatever happened next needed an audience, and that's where the story turns. Let's reconstruct what likely happened to Raymond in the weeks before March 17th. This is based on pattern and probability, the kind of recruitment that happened routinely in this world. Someone would have identified his weakness first. Gambling debts aren't secret for long. The people you owe talk to other people. Word spreads, and eventually someone with strategic interests starts paying attention. The approach would have been careful, not threatening, almost sympathetic. Maybe it happened in a casual conversation. Someone mentioning they'd heard Raymond had some bad luck, offering condolences, mentioning that luck changes, that sometimes opportunities appear when you need them most, not offering anything specific, just planting a seed. Then, a few days later, another conversation, this time slightly more direct, mentioning that certain information, nothing major, nothing that would hurt anyone, could be valuable to people who appreciate loyalty, that helping the right people could mean those people help you, still not asking for anything, just establishing the framework. The actual offer would have come later, after Raymond had time to think, after the debt pressure increased, after the possibility had time to work its way into his mind as his own idea. We need to know if certain conversations are happening, not the details, just confirmation, timing, location. That's all. Simple information that doesn't hurt anyone, and in return, your accounts get settled. Clean slate. Fresh start. The beauty of this approach. It doesn't feel like betrayal. It feels like survival, like taking care of yourself, like doing something small that doesn't really matter to help solve a big problem. That's how people justify crossing lines. They tell themselves it's not really crossing, just stepping close to the edge. Raymond probably believed he was being smart, getting out of a jam without anyone getting hurt. After all, what real harm came from confirming a meeting happened? St. Clair would make her deal. The coalition would get what they wanted. Everyone wins. He just needed to let someone know when and where. Simple, except nothing in this world was ever simple. And that's where the story turns. Now let me tell you about the other pressure building in parallel, because while the Watcher was tracking Raymond, someone else was noticing things too. Marcus Webb, St. Clair's longtime lieutenant, the man who'd been in that room on March 17th, was meticulous about security. He'd survived in this world by trusting his instincts and verifying everything. And something felt off. Not anything obvious, just small things, timing that felt wrong, coincidences that stacked up. 3 days before the March 17th meeting, Webb had noticed Raymond near the building where the social club was located. Not inside, just nearby. Standing on a corner, smoking like he was waiting for someone. Nothing suspicious by itself. People stood on corners, but Webb filed it away. Because in his experience, people near places they shouldn't be usually had reasons. Then, the day after the meeting, Webb heard that a rival operation had been asking questions about St. Clair's schedule. Casual questions, innocuous questions, but questions nonetheless. Again, nothing definitive, just interesting. But when the Watcher called him at 3 a.m. on March 18th and told him about Raymond's diner contact, something clicked. Webb had been in that room when they discussed who knew about the meeting. 3 people in the room. St. Clair's inner circle. Maybe 5 people total who knew the timing. And a handful of peripheral people who might have noticed preparations but wouldn't know specifics. Raymond was peripheral. Close enough to notice patterns. Not close enough to know details, but close enough to know something was happening. Close enough to confirm timing if someone asked the right questions. Webb made a decision. He needed to talk to Raymond. Not aggressively, just a conversation. See how he responded. This is where the suspicion mini-arc begins. 3 conversations over the next 14 hours that would tighten the net without Raymond realizing it. The first conversation happened at 9 a.m. Webb found Raymond at a coffee spot where St. Clair's people often gathered in the mornings. Casual territory. Safe. Webb sat down across from Raymond. Ordered coffee. Made small talk about the weather, about business, about nothing important. Then, casually. Quiet night last night. Everything smooth on your end? Raymond nodded. Yeah, all good. Nothing unusual. Webb sipped his coffee. Good. Important to keep things routine, especially lately with all the pressure around. Raymond agreed. Absolutely. Keeping my head down. Webb watched his hands. Steady. His eyes met Webb's directly. His posture relaxed. Either Raymond was innocent or he was good. Webb continued. You hear anything strange lately? Any unusual questions? People asking about schedules, timing, who's where? Raymond shook his head. Nothing. Why? Something going on? Webb shrugged. Just checking. You know how it is. Always something. They finished their coffee. Parted ways. But Webb had learned something. Not from what Raymond said. From what he didn't ask. No curiosity about why Webb was asking. No follow-up questions. Just smooth deflection and a quick exit. Someone with nothing to hide usually shows more curiosity. The second conversation happened at 2 p.m. Webb arranged to see Raymond again, This time about routine business, picking up collections from a few spots, dropping off payments. Work Raymond did regularly. They walked together for 3 blocks, talked about numbers, about collectors, about minor operational details. Then Webb mentioned, almost as an aside, St. Clair's got a meeting tonight. Everyone's expected. 7 o'clock, the usual place. He watched Raymond's reaction. A flicker, just a micro-expression, something that might have been concern or surprise or calculation. Gone in half a second. Raymond asked, "Everyone, what's it about?" Webb kept his tone neutral. "She'll explain tonight. Just make sure you're there." Raymond nodded. Of course. 7 o'clock. They continued walking, finished the business, separated. But Webb had seen what he needed to see. That flicker, that moment of processing. Someone expecting a routine meeting doesn't calculate. They just acknowledge. The third conversation didn't happen until 5:30 p.m., 90 minutes before the scheduled meeting. Webb found Raymond near his rooming house. This time, Webb's tone was different. Still not aggressive, but pointed. "Raymond, need to ask you something directly." Raymond stopped. "Sure. What's up?" Webb chose his words carefully. If someone was asking questions about our operations, about timing, about meetings, about who knows what, would you tell me? Raymond's expression tightened. Of course. Why would you even ask that? Webb held his gaze. Because loyalty matters, especially now. And I need to know everyone in that room tonight can be trusted. Raymond's jaw set. "You can trust me. Always have." Webb nodded slowly. "Good. Because if there's anything you need to tell me, anything at all, now's the time. Before that meeting, once we're all in that room, there's no going back." The air between them changed. Heavier, more charged. Raymond understood what was being offered. A chance to come clean. A window that wouldn't stay open. He looked at Webb, and for just a moment, maybe 3 seconds, something passed across his face, a decision being made in real time. Then his expression smoothed. "I've got nothing to tell you, Marcus. I'll see you at 7. He walked away. Webb watched him go, and Webb knew, not from evidence, from 20 years of reading people, from instinct honed by survival. Raymond was the leak, and tonight, in front of everyone, it would become clear. But here's what Webb didn't know yet. The Watcher and St. Clair had already prepared something Raymond would never see coming. Because while Webb was having his 3 conversations, the Watcher was building a paper trail, and that's where the story turns. Here's what most people misunderstand about leverage. It's not about what you know, it's about what you can prove, what you can show, what becomes undeniable when placed in front of witnesses. The Watcher understood this. He'd spent years watching how power actually worked. The difference between rumor and reputation, between accusation and evidence. So between 3 a.m. on March 18th and 6 p.m. that same evening, he built something specific. A visible, traceable pattern that Raymond couldn't deny. It started with the Watcher's reports, written down, times, locations, descriptions, not just memories, documentation. 12:22 a.m. Subject observed at diner, 135th Street, brief contact with known collector from rival operation. 1:47 a.m. Subject made payphone call, duration approximately 45 seconds, immediately preceded meeting with unidentified individual outside late-night establishment. Simple observations. But when written down, they formed a timeline. Next, the Watcher made phone calls. Not to confront anyone, to gather confirmation. He spoke to the night manager at the diner, someone who owed St. Clair's organization favors. Asked if anyone had been in around 12:22. Got confirmation. 2 men, brief visit, unusual timing. He spoke to the building superintendent at Raymond's rooming house. Asked if Raymond had visitors lately. Got interesting information. Someone had stopped by twice in the past week. Didn't leave a name. Just asked for Raymond. Small details. But details that connected. Then came the clever part. The watcher knew the rival operations collector, the man from the diner. They'd crossed paths over the years, not friends, but familiar. The kind of professional distance where you could have a conversation without it meaning anything. At 4 p.m., the watcher arranged to run into him, made it look casual. Two professionals sharing a drink. And during that conversation, he mentioned something specific. Heard you had a productive night. Hoped the information was worth what you paid. The collector's expression gave him away. Just for a second. Surprise that the watcher knew. Then calculation about what that knowledge meant. The watcher pressed gently. Here's the thing. Whatever you think you bought, it's already known. The meeting happened. The deal's moving forward. But some people aren't happy about how information moved around. He let that sit. Then added, if I were you, I'd make sure my people understand that the source they're using isn't reliable anymore. Might save everyone some trouble. The collector considered this. Understood what was being offered. A quiet warning. A chance to distance himself before things got messy. He nodded slowly. Appreciate the heads up. And that conversation, which the watcher knew would get back to the rival operations leadership, accomplished something important. It confirmed the leak existed. It confirmed Raymond was the source. And it signaled that St. Clair's organization already knew, which meant when the evening meeting happened, it wouldn't be a witch hunt. It would be a demonstration. By 6 p.m., the watcher had everything assembled. Times, locations, confirmations, patterns. Not enough for a court of law, but more than enough for a court of reputation. He brought it all to St. Clair, laid it out, showed her the timeline. She studied it for 10 minutes, asked clarifying questions, confirmed details. Then she made her decision about how the evening would unfold, but Bumpy already had the first receipt. Let me tell you about the community thread that was running parallel to all this intrigue. Because what happened next wouldn't matter if it was just internal business. The power of what St. Clair planned came from witnesses, from community, from people who would carry the story forward. And there was someone who embodied why that mattered. Her name was Delilah Price, 47 years old. Worked 6 days a week as a seamstress in the garment district. Came home every evening to a small apartment on 134th Street that she kept immaculate. Raised 3 children after her husband died in 1929. Survived the Depression by being careful, disciplined, and smart with every dollar. And every day, Delilah played a number. Not much, a quarter, sometimes 50 cents on paydays, but consistently. For 7 years. Most days, she lost. That's how numbers work. But over those 7 years, she'd hit 4 times. Small payouts, $20 here, $50 there. Once, memorably, $140 when her combination came up straight. That money mattered. It wasn't gambling money. It was grocery money when work was slow. Rent money when one of her children needed help. Emergency money when life surprised you, and she trusted it because she played with St. Clair's operation. The odds were the odds. Nobody could fix that. But the payout was guaranteed. You hit, you got paid. No delays, no excuses, no mysterious problems that made your winnings disappear. That trust was why St. Clair's operation thrived. Thousands of Delilahs across Harlem, playing small amounts, knowing that the game was straight. That trust was worth more than any single large bet. It was sustainable. It was community. On March 18th, Delilah noticed something unusual. She normally placed her bet with a runner named Thomas who worked her block. Reliable man. Been doing the route for 3 years. Always polite, always on time, always had a kind word. But that morning, Thomas seemed distracted. Nervous, He took her quarter, wrote down her number, but his hands were shaking slightly. Delilah noticed. "Everything all right, Thomas?" He forced a smile. "Fine, Miss Price. Just a long night." She didn't push, but she filed it away. Because in Harlem, you paid attention to changes in routine. Changes meant something. That afternoon, walking home from work, she overheard a conversation. Two men on the subway platform, talking low but not quite low enough. Heard there's trouble. Something about the meeting. Someone talked. Who? Don't know yet. But St. Clair knows. Tonight's gonna be interesting. Delilah didn't stare. Didn't react. Just kept walking. But she understood what she'd heard. Something was happening in the world that made her quarter matter every day. Something that determined whether Thomas kept his route, whether payouts stayed reliable, whether the trust held. When she got home, she mentioned it to her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who also played daily. Mrs. Chen nodded knowingly. I heard something too, from my cousin who works at the club. Said everyone's been called in tonight. They didn't speculate, didn't gossip, just acknowledged that something significant was unfolding, and both women understood. Whatever happened tonight would affect their world, their small daily bets, their trust, their neighborhood. This is why St. Clair's plan mattered. It wasn't just about catching a leak. It was about demonstrating to the Delilahs and the Thomases and everyone who depended on the system that the trust was protected. That betrayal had consequences, that the order held. Because without that demonstration, rumors would spread, doubt would creep in, and the entire foundation would crack. By 6:30 p.m., word had spread throughout Harlem's underworld. Something was happening at 7 o'clock. The usual place, a social club on Lenox Avenue, second floor, room that could hold maybe 40 people comfortably. Everyone who mattered had been called in. Collectors, runners, spot operators, lieutenants, even some peripheral people like Raymond. The room filled quickly. By 6:55, 35 people were present. Conversations were muted. Everyone sensed the weight. At 6:58, St. Clair entered. The room went quiet. She didn't sit at the head of the table. She stood, surveyed the room, made eye contact with people individually. Then she spoke. "Thank you for coming. I know some of you rearranged plans. I appreciate it. This won't take long." She let the silence hold for 3 seconds, then continued. 3 nights ago, I had a private meeting. 3 people in the room. The purpose was sensitive. The timing was deliberate. The secrecy was necessary. Another pause. Eyes moving across faces. By midnight, people outside this organization knew about that meeting. By 1 a.m., our competitors had confirmation. By morning, information that should have stayed internal was being used against us. The tension in the room thickened. People shifted in their seats. A few glanced around, trying to read who might be responsible. St. Clair's voice remained calm, even, but with an edge underneath. Now, I'm not here to make accusations. I'm here to establish facts. Because in our world, facts matter, trust matters, and when trust breaks, everything breaks. She nodded to the watcher who stood near the back of the room. He stepped forward, carrying a folder. Over the past 18 hours, we've documented something interesting. A pattern, movements, contacts, conversations. He opened the folder, began reading, voice neutral and precise. March 18th, 12:22 a.m. 2 individuals made contact at a diner on 135th Street. Brief exchange. No words overheard, but timing was coordinated. One individual works for a competing operation. The other is in this room. Heads turned, people looking at each other. Raymond sat very still, face carefully blank. The watcher continued. 1:47 a.m. The same individual made a payphone call, then met with an unidentified person outside an establishment known to be frequented by the Downtown Coalition. Conversation lasted approximately 30 seconds. He flipped a page. Between March 10th and March 17th, the same individual was observed near locations relevant to our operations at unusual times. Not conducting regular business, just present, watching. Raymond's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The watcher looked up from the folder. These observations were made by multiple people, documented independently, times confirmed by witnesses who have no reason to lie. St. Clair took back the floor. Now, here's what I want everyone to understand. This isn't about punishment. It's about clarity, about making sure we all understand what loyalty means and what happens when it's compromised. She turned to face Raymond directly. Raymond, do you have anything you'd like to say? The room went absolutely silent, 35 people holding their breath. Raymond sat for a long moment. You could see him calculating, weighing options, considering denials, explanations, defenses. But St. Clair had learned something over the years. When you present someone with undeniable facts in front of witnesses, you take away the option of lying, because the lie becomes more damaging than the truth. Raymond's shoulders sagged slightly. I had debts. They offered to clear them, said they just wanted confirmation about timing. Nothing specific. Just. St. Clair held up a hand. I don't need the justification. I need everyone here to understand something. She turned back to address the entire room. Information is the only thing we have that lasts. Money comes and goes. Territory shifts. Muscle ages. But information, knowing who to trust, knowing who keeps their word, knowing who will break under pressure, that's permanent. She gestured to Raymond without looking at him. He made a choice. Under pressure, he decided his immediate problem mattered more than long-term trust. I understand that choice. I even sympathize with it. But I can't allow it. Webb spoke up from his position near the door. What happens now? St. Clair considered this. Raymond is done with this organization, effective immediately. He doesn't collect, he doesn't run, he doesn't operate in any capacity. Everyone here is a witness to that. Raymond looked up. That's it. St. Clair met his eyes. That's it. No violence. No retaliation. You walk out of here and you find another way to make a living. But you're out. And everyone knows why. She turned back to the room. And here's what everyone else needs to understand. The people he gave information to, they've already been informed that their source is compromised. The meeting they tried to disrupt happened anyway. The deal moved forward. All they accomplished was exposing their own desperation. Someone in the back asked, what about the debts? The people he owed? St. Clair smiled thinly. Already handled. His accounts are settled. By us. Because I won't have it said that people betray this organization because we don't take care of our own. The room processed this. It was elegant, brutal in its simplicity, but elegant. Raymond was out, publicly, permanently, but alive. The rival operation looked foolish for buying compromised information, and St. Clair looked magnanimous for settling his debts anyway, proving that loyalty would have been rewarded if he'd just asked. But here's what made it legendary. What happened next? Because St. Clair wasn't done. She gestured to the watcher again. He produced a second folder, thicker. Now let's talk about the people who created this situation. The ones who identified Raymond's weakness and exploited it. The ones who thought they could undermine us with whispers and strategic leaks. She opened the folder, began laying out papers on the table. Names, dates, transaction records. Over the past 3 months, the Downtown Coalition has been making moves. Small things. A collector getting hassled here. A spot getting raided there. Pressure designed to make us uncertain. to make us think we needed their protection. She tapped one of the papers. But here's what they didn't know. We've been documenting everything, every move, every pressure point, every connection. The watcher added, and we've shared this documentation with certain people who matter. People in positions to ask questions. People who don't appreciate outside operators creating chaos in Harlem. St. Clair looked around the room. The coalition wanted information about our meeting. Well, now they have information about themselves, about their operations, about connections they'd rather keep quiet. She let that sink in. We're not starting a war. We're establishing boundaries. They now understand that pressure creates counter-pressure, that information flows both ways, and that Harlem isn't territory they can just walk into. This was the real lesson. Not just handling the leak, but leveraging it, using the attempted infiltration to gather intelligence that now served as insurance. Someone asked, what's stopping them from trying again? St. Clair's smile was cold. The understanding that next time, the information we've gathered doesn't stay private. Next time, certain authorities receive very detailed documentation about very specific operations. Everyone loses in that scenario. Better for everyone to maintain current arrangements. Mutually assured exposure. The Cold War principle applied to Harlem's underworld. Webb nodded slowly, understanding the full scope of what had been built in 18 hours. Not just catching a leak, but turning it into leverage that protected them going forward. St. Clair closed the folders. That's all. Everyone back to work. Business continues as normal, and remember, trust is the only currency that matters. Protect it. The meeting ended. People filed out quietly. Raymond left last, walking out into the Harlem night, his brief career in St. Clair's organization over. But the story didn't end there. Because what happened over the next 72 hours became the part people still talk about. Case File 6. The Trap. Let me tell you what the Downtown Coalition didn't understand until it was too late. They thought they were running an infiltration operation. They thought they were gathering intelligence to use for leverage. They didn't realize they were walking into a counterintelligence trap. Here's how it actually worked, pieced together from accounts and pattern recognition. The moment St. Clair's organization detected Raymond's unusual behavior, even before the March 17th meeting, they made a decision. They didn't stop him. They watched him. They let the contact happen. They documented everything. Because stopping a leak gets you security. Watching a leak gets you intelligence about who's leaking, why they're leaking, and what the other side actually wants to know. The March 17th meeting, the one Raymond confirmed? It happened. But the sensitive details, the real terms, the actual numbers, the specific arrangements, those never left the room. What Raymond could confirm was that a meeting occurred. That's it. The coalition thought they'd bought valuable intelligence. They'd actually bought confirmation of something that didn't help them at all. Meanwhile, every move they made to recruit Raymond, every contact, every payment method, every middleman, all of it got documented, traced, connected to names, operations, financial flows. By the time St. Clair held her meeting on March 18th, she had a complete map of the coalition's pressure campaign. Not just against her, against 3 other Harlem operations they were targeting simultaneously. That intelligence got shared, quietly, with the other operators, with certain community leaders, with a few carefully selected officials who appreciated knowing which outside interests were trying to destabilize their precincts. The coalition suddenly found themselves exposed, their methods known, their targets warned, their leverage evaporated. One of the coalition's lawyers received an interesting phone call on March 20th. The caller didn't identify themselves, just mentioned that certain financial records had been copied, that certain connections between legitimate businesses and less legitimate operations had been documented, that this information was currently private but could become public if pressure continued. The lawyer understood, made phone calls, held meetings. By March 22nd, the coalition sent word through intermediaries. They respected current arrangements. No further pressure. Everyone maintains their territory. St. Clair had won without a single act of violence. Just information, timing, and the willingness to turn an attack into an opportunity. And that's where the story turns. But the public part, the part that became legend, happened on March 21st. Saturday nights at the Savoy meant music, dancing, and half of Harlem packed into the most famous ballroom in the world. 2 bandstands, spring-loaded floor, the best musicians in the country. A place where everyone came together, numbers runners and seamstresses, doctors and laborers, gamblers and church ladies. Neutral ground, community space. St. Clair rarely appeared at the Savoy. Too public, too exposed. She preferred back rooms, small gatherings, controlled environments. But on March 21st at 10:30 p.m., she walked through the front doors. Not hiding, not sneaking, walking in like she owned the place. The watcher walked 3 steps behind her. Webb flanked her other side. A few other trusted people nearby, but not a show of force. Just presence. Word spread through the ballroom faster than sound. Madame St. Clair's here. The music didn't stop. The dancing continued. But attention shifted. People noticing, watching, wondering why tonight, why here, why visible. St. Clair moved through the crowd gracefully. Stopped to greet people, shook hands with community leaders, smiled at the musicians, behaved like someone without a care in the world. But everyone understood what they were seeing. A demonstration. A woman who just weathered an infiltration attempt, walking into the most public space in Harlem with absolute confidence. No hiding, no fear, no indication that anything had threatened her organization. At 11 p.m., she stopped near one of the bandstands. Chick Webb's orchestra was playing. The floor was packed with dancers. Someone approached her, one of the community leaders she'd greeted earlier, a minister from a church on 132nd Street. They spoke briefly. He asked a question. She answered clearly, voice carrying just far enough in a momentary gap in the music. Business is good. Trust is strong. Everyone's where they should be. 5 seconds. 9 words. But everyone within 30 feet heard it. And that became the legendary line. Not shouted from a stage, not delivered dramatically, just stated as simple fact in the middle of the Savoy ballroom on a Saturday night. Trust is strong. Everyone's where they should be. Translation for those who understood. The leak was caught. The threat was handled. Order maintained. The coalition backed down. Business continues. She stayed another 30 minutes. Danced one song with the watcher. A slow number, graceful and public. Then left the way she came, walking out the front door, head high, while hundreds of witnesses watched. By Sunday morning, the story was all over Harlem. Not the details. Those stayed private. But the broad strokes? Someone had tried to undermine St. Clair. She'd identified the leak in hours, handled it without violence, turned it into leverage, and demonstrated her security by appearing at the Savoy like nothing had happened. The legend grew in the telling. People who weren't even there claimed they'd witnessed it. The timeline compressed. In some versions, she'd identified the leak in 60 seconds, not 18 hours. The details got embellished. In some versions, she'd confronted Raymond in front of hundreds, not 35 people in a back room. But the core truth remained. She'd turned an attack into a demonstration of strength. Information over violence, strategy over reaction. This is where the story becomes important. Not just as entertainment, but as history. Because what happened at that Savoy ballroom appearance wasn't just about St. Clair's reputation. It was about community understanding, about hundreds of ordinary people, the Delilahs and the Thomases and everyone who depended on the numbers game staying stable, seeing with their own eyes that the system still worked. Delilah Price was there that night. She'd come with her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, and 2 other ladies from their building. They'd saved up for Saturday night at the Savoy, a rare treat, something to look forward to all week. When St. Clair walked in, Delilah noticed immediately, pointed her out to Mrs. Chen. That's her, Madame St. Clair. They watched her move through the crowd, watched her greet people, watched her dance, watched her leave, and on the walk home, the 4 women talked about what it meant. She didn't look worried, one of them noted. She looked strong, another agreed. Whatever happened, Delilah said quietly, it's handled. We can trust our numbers tomorrow. That conversation, multiplied across hundreds of similar conversations that night and the next day, was worth more than any violence could accomplish. It was confirmation, reassurance, community solidarity. Thomas, the nervous numbers runner Delilah had noticed earlier, was also at the Savoy. He saw St. Clair, saw her confidence, and understood that whatever had made him nervous on Wednesday was resolved. On Monday morning, when he made his rounds, his hands were steady again. His smile was genuine. And when Delilah handed him her quarter and gave him her number, they both understood that trust had been tested and held. This is what the history books miss. The small moments, the individual transactions, the daily interactions that defined whether a system worked or collapsed. The newspapers would never report that on March 21, 1936, a woman's public appearance at a ballroom stabilized an entire economic network that thousands of people depended on. But that's exactly what happened, and that's where the story turns. 3 scenes from the days following March 21st tell you everything you need to know about how this story reverberated. March 23rd, a private room in a midtown club, 5 men representing different interests within the downtown coalition. They'd gathered to discuss why their carefully planned pressure campaign had collapsed. The lawyer who'd received the threatening phone call explained they knew everything, every contact, every payment, every pressure point. They were watching us while we thought we were watching them. One of the others, frustrated, so what? We have resources. We have connections. 1 woman running numbers in Harlem. The lawyer cut him off. 1 woman who just demonstrated she has better intelligence, better discipline, and better community support than we do. And who now has documentation that could cause significant problems for everyone in this room. Silence. Another voice, older and wiser. So we back off. We back off, the lawyer confirmed. We maintain current arrangements. We don't push. And we remember that Harlem isn't as soft a target as we assumed. The meeting ended. The pressure campaign ended with it. For St. Clair, that was the real victory. Not catching Raymond, that was tactics. Getting the coalition to back off permanently was strategy. March 24th. St. Clair met with her inner circle, Webb, the Watcher, and 3 others who'd been instrumental in tracking Raymond and building the counterintelligence file. They reviewed everything. What worked? What could have been handled better? What lessons applied going forward? Webb asked the question others were thinking. Why settle his debts? Why be generous to someone who betrayed us? St. Clair considered her answer carefully. Because everyone who knows about this needs to understand 2 things. First, betrayal has consequences. He's out, permanently, publicly. But second, we take care of our people. He should have come to us with his problem. We would have helped. That message matters. The Watcher added. It also makes the coalition look worse. They exploited a weakness we would have fixed. Makes their approach seem petty and predatory. St. Clair nodded. Exactly. We're not just handling problems. We're building reputation. Every decision sends a message to multiple audiences. Our people, their people, the community. Webb smiled slightly. And the Savoy appearance? The Savoy appearance was for Delilah Price, St. Clair said simply. And everyone like her. The people who play their quarter every day and trust us to be there. They needed to see that we're still here, still strong, still worthy of that trust. This is what separated St. Clair from ordinary operators. She understood that power wasn't just about control. It was about perception, about community, about the daily renewal of trust between her organization and the thousands of people who depended on it. March 26th. Evening, a street corner in Harlem where collectors and runners often gathered after finishing their routes. Half a dozen men standing around, sharing cigarettes, talking about the week. One of them mentioned the Raymond situation. Heard he's leaving Harlem, going to Philadelphia. Fresh start. Another nodded. Probably smart. Can't stay here after that. You think she really figured it out that fast? The way people tell it, she walked into the diner, took one look and knew. Laughter. Stories grow in the telling. Still, another voice added, however long it took, she got him. Shut down the whole operation, and nobody got hurt. One of the older collectors, a man who'd been around since the Dutch Schultz days, spoke up. That's the difference. Schultz would have made it bloody, turned it into a statement. St. Clair made it about intelligence, about showing she's always 3 moves ahead. You think it's over? The coalition backing off for good? The older collector shrugged. For now. Maybe for a long while. She gave them a reason to stay away, made it more expensive to push than to leave her alone. That's how you win. Not by fighting every battle, but by making the other side decide the battle isn't worth it. They stood in silence for a moment, then dispersed. Back to their lives, their roots, their daily work in an operation that had just proven itself capable of weathering sophisticated attacks. This conversation, like hundreds of others happening simultaneously across Harlem, was the real aftermath. Not newspaper headlines, not police reports, just people who worked in the world processing what had happened and what it meant. The consensus: St. Clair was someone you didn't test. Not because she was violent, but because she was smart, patient, strategic, and always better informed than you expected. That reputation was worth more than any strong-arm tactic. It prevented future attacks. It attracted better people to work with. It built the kind of durability that couldn't be taken by force. By April, life in Harlem had returned to normal rhythms. Delilah Price played her daily quarter. Thomas made his rounds. The numbers game functioned smoothly. The coalition stayed in their lane, and St. Clair continued building an organization that would influence Harlem for years to come. The legend of the 60-second identification, though the reality took 18 hours, became a story people told to explain how things worked in Harlem's underworld. Not through violence, through information, through reading people, through understanding that in the end, trust and intelligence beat muscle and threat. And decades later, when people asked how St. Clair maintained power in a world dominated by men and violence, this story provided the answer. She was always thinking 3 moves ahead. She turned attacks into opportunities, and she never forgot that her real power base wasn't in backrooms. It was in the thousands of ordinary people who trusted her to keep the system fair. Here's what this story teaches, stripped of legend and mythology. In any world where power matters, criminal or legitimate, past or present, the same principles apply. Information is more durable than force. Trust is more valuable than fear. Strategy beats reaction, and the person who can turn an opponent's attack into their own opportunity is the person who survives longest. St. Clair didn't catch Raymond because she was psychic. She caught him because she'd built a system. Watchers in position, protocols for detecting unusual patterns, trusted people who reported discrepancies, a discipline about security that everyone understood and maintained. When Raymond broke protocol, making nervous contact at a diner, deviating from routine, the system detected it. Not instantly, but quickly enough. And once detected, the response wasn't emotional or reactive. It was calculated. Document everything. Build an undeniable case. present it publicly to establish consequences, but also settle his debts to demonstrate that loyalty would have been rewarded. Every decision served multiple purposes. Every action sent messages to multiple audiences. That's sophisticated leadership. The coalition learned they'd underestimated their target. Harlem learned their trust was well placed. Raymond learned betrayal had permanent costs. And everyone who heard the story learned that in St. Clair's world, intelligence and strategy mattered more than anything else. That's a lesson that transcends time, place, and circumstance. Whether you're running a numbers operation in 1936 Harlem or managing any organization where trust and information matter, the principles hold. Build systems, not dependencies. Reward loyalty. Document everything. Think strategically. And when someone tests you, make sure your response teaches a lesson that prevents future tests. St. Clair walked into the Savoy ballroom that Saturday night, not because she needed to prove anything to herself. She already knew she'd won. She walked in to make sure everyone else knew it too. And in doing so, she turned a defensive victory into a demonstration of strength that enhanced her position for years to come. That's mastery. Not of violence, of strategy, of human psychology, of understanding how power actually works when you strip away the mythology and look at the mechanics. The story became legend because it perfectly encapsulated everything people needed to understand about how things really operated. And legends persist because they contain truth, even when the details get compressed in the telling. If you made it this far, you've just heard a story they don't teach in history classes. Not because it isn't important, but because it happened in a world that didn't leave official records. A world where power moved through handshakes and whispers, where reputation mattered more than titles, where the smartest person in the room usually stayed quiet and watched everyone else. This is the real history of Harlem. Not the sanitized version, not the simplified version, the complicated, strategic, human version where people made choices under pressure and lived with the consequences. Hit the like button if you appreciate history that doesn't pull punches. Subscribe for more stories from this era. And drop a comment. Do you think St. Clair's approach, intelligence over force, strategy over reaction, would still work today? Or has the world changed too much? Because here's the thing about human nature. It doesn't change as much as we think. The technology changes. The context changes. But the fundamental dynamics of trust, information, reputation, and power, those are eternal. Next time, we're telling the story of how this network intersected with something bigger, how local operations connected to national structures, how a series of backroom conversations in New York, Chicago, and other cities created a framework that would define organized crime for decades. It involves names, Charles Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, and a series of meetings that changed everything, but told from the Harlem perspective, from the point of view of people who watched the larger game while playing their own. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember, history isn't just what made the newspapers. It's what happened in the spaces between, in the conversations nobody recorded, in the decisions that seemed small at the time but changed everything. This has been a story from that hidden history, from the Harlem that existed in backrooms and on street corners, from a world where information was power and trust was currency. Thanks for listening.